Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to present this topic to you. My name is Lulema, and I embarked on this research study as an extension of my MBA research assignment, where I focused on the impact of systemic lupus erythematosus on employment outcomes for female adults in Africa. The insights uncovered in the research assignment showed that there's value in following through with further research and further literature, and hence then doing this research. So that gives a bit of the background on why the research started. So maybe some of you are not familiar with systemic lupus erythematosus and are wondering what this actually is. It's also commonly known as SLE or lupus. And it's really an autoimmune disease where your immune system mistakenly starts to attack your tissues and your organs, and you end up, the individual with the condition ends up resulting in having inflammation, and through that inflammation, certain body systems start getting impacted. So it can impact your skin, it can impact your blood cells, your kidneys, your heart, your lungs, all your main organs in the body, basically. This condition is commonly known to occur 9 times more in women than men, and studies have shown that it's common in African women, in African American women, and people from Asian ancestries. So why did I decide to do this study? I chose this area of study because it's a personal area for me as well. I was diagnosed with lupus in my matric year, and through that process, with doctors and everything they explained about the condition, and at that time trying to unpack and diagnose the condition, there were lots of talks about my future, going to university, going into the workplace. So for me, it was very personal to try and unpack and understand, given everything that I went through to be at this point in life, what other women in the professional space were dealing with, given the nature of the condition that I'll highlight as I go into the discussion. So my journey has been one where there's been a lot of uncertainty, there's been a lot of need to be resilient, and to hope, basically, and to want to dream and achieve those dreams despite having this condition. So why is the study important? It's important really because less attention is given to episodic and invisible conditions that do not fit perfectly, and I think our keynote speaker Elsie spoke about this, that do not fit perfectly in the visible and static forms of impairment used to determine disability. That's one of the key things we are seeing, and that's one of the key things that were highlighted when I went about doing the study. There's also a need to examine how social and institutional expectations around disclosure, competence, and appearance shape the experience of those living with invisible diseases. South Africa has a progressive legislative framework through the Employment Equity Act and the Technical Assistance Guidelines on the employment of people with disabilities. But still, workplace inclusion for individuals with disability remains uneven and inadequately accommodated. More so for individuals with invisible disabilities, for whom from whom additional barriers are encountered for sustained employment. Once again, I'd like to highlight something the keynote speaker said because it really resonated with me. Because of the condition and because of the difficulty that is experienced with the invisibleness in the condition, people with these type of invisible disabilities actually over-prepare, double-check, and then do the work. So when we did this study, we had a research question, and it really focused on how individuals with lupus narrate their experience of disclosure, identity, and work within the South African context. Most individuals narrated that they are burdened with not just the disease, but the labor of appearing undiseased. Various scholars have expressed how workplaces are structured by ableist norms, privileging uninterrupted productivity, bodily stability, and a linear career trajectory, therefore rendering illness disruptive. This type of thinking compels women with lupus to conceal pain in efforts to maintain professional credibility in environments that struggle to accommodate bodily ambiguity. Let's look at a bit of the literature and what some of people who have done literature in these various sections had to say. So with feminist disability theory, the feminist disability scholarship has largely centered on visible and static forms of impairment. Less attention has been paid to episodic and invisible conditions that elude straightforward categories due to illness shifts over time, the fluctuating intensity of the disease, and the disease remaining medically contested. When you look at invisible illness, this highlights that for conditions such as lupus, whose manifestations vary widely and appear inconsistently, diagnosis is often a process of exclusion, misinterpretation, and emotional distress. Women in particular are disproportionately affected by such delays, due in part to gender assumptions about emotional origins of pain and fatigue. If we look at epistemic injustice, delayed recognition not only disrupts access to care, it destabilizes identity, it erodes confidence in an individual's perception, and it complicates participation in social and professional life. And then when we look at gender and the burden of bodily control, we see that here the literature has demonstrated that women with chronic illness frequently engage in appearance management, aiming to minimize disruptions to workplace norms, and individuals with non-apparent conditions are then left negotiating how much of themselves to reveal. What was the methodology used in the study? So the study draws on a narrative inquiry, a method grounded in the belief that people make sense of illnesses through storytelling. The approach was particularly suited to understand how women make sense of chronic illness through their work lives, how they navigate disclosure, and how they negotiate the tension between ambition and health. A group of professional women were identified through the snowballing method, and virtual or in-person meetings, one-on-one virtual or in-person meetings were then held with them in an interview type of approach. Based on the research, we identified 3 main findings and themed these findings. So the first one looked at confusion and medical recognition. And this unpacks the confusion, fear, and gradual loss of physical control individuals experienced as they navigated unexplained symptoms in the early stages of the disease. The absence of familiarity with lupus amongst healthcare providers deepened the confusion. Individuals had to contend with managing daily tasks and the sudden withdrawal of body cooperation with no warning. Some of the sentiments participants expressed were, it was like gambling around you. Doctors were not used to this kind of sickness. Another participant said, when they were trying to figure out what was happening to them, they kept having different symptoms and it kept rearing its ugly head. Another participant mentioned that they kept going to their doctor, and the doctor was adamant that something is just not right. But the only advice they were able to give them, because of talking through diets and everything else, was don't eat spicy food. Another individual indicated that for her, the condition just happened haphazardly. 1 minute she was in her office wearing her 12-inch stilettos, and then the next thing she couldn't feel anything. When she woke up, she was in ICU. The second finding, the theme disruption of bodily identity, really looks at how the disconnection from previously effortless abilities created fear and disbelief, especially in the absence of a diagnosis. The sudden shift where strength turned into fragility overnight left individuals feeling like they're watching their own decline without explanation. Hair loss, facial rashes, swellings, weight changes affected how individuals saw themselves and how others responded to them. For the women, the changes were deeply intertwined with identity, confidence, and their femininity. And some of the statements expressed were, picking up a paper, please just imagine that, picking up a paper was difficult. It feels too heavy to pick up a paper. Another person said that it was very challenging because I was sick quite a lot, but I still made it to work. The final finding 3, under the theme discomfort with disability, revealed how women living with lupus did not easily align with the term disability. They did not consider it their lived experience, and they did not want to be perceived by others or themselves as disabled. They accepted lupus as an invisible illness, but pushed back on being defined by a word that to them possibly signified limitations, dependency, and social exclusion. They understood lupus was a condition others could not see, but they did not believe that should equate to incapability. In contrast, they viewed themselves as fully capable, even if managing an internal battle. Some individuals, however, shifted their view when they realized being categorized as disabled could be applied as a legal and institutional category that could be used to access support. They saw disability as something, when disclosed, could unlock workplace rights. So how do we bring this all together? The Continuum of Embodied Challenge framework looks at this, and it basically breaks down the cycle of dealing with this condition into 3 phases. Those being the medical ambiguity phase, the identity negotiation phase, and the workplace adaptation phase. In the medical ambiguity phase, that's trying to figure out the symptoms, trying to figure out what's wrong and how to get diagnosed, so misdiagnosis and late diagnosis. In the identity negotiation phase, it was really about dealing now with the symptoms and trying to figure out how to manage navigating through these symptoms. And then the workplace adaptation looked at, okay, now I understand what I'm dealing with. How do I go back into the workplace, carry on being the professional I am with this condition, and still try and thrive? Where to from here? The study advocates and emphasizes the importance of designing workplaces that recognize the labor of invisibility and embrace inclusion as a continuous, flexible practice. The study also calls for a reframing of professionalism itself, one that makes space for vulnerability, adaptation, and the full humanity of those who work while unwell and require organizations to adapt their design and expectations to fluctuating embodiments rather than placing the burden solely on the individual. Future studies are definitely required, and these can look at broadening the scope to include other genders such as males, because it's focused on women. And then looking at this from a global or a continental perspective, because we focused on South Africa. And then most importantly, how institutions and organizations can best accommodate employees with invisible disabilities and how they believe they can collaborate together with these individuals, taking into account what research has revealed. I'd like to end with what Elsie, the keynote speaker, said. Inclusion is strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.